Okay, looks like I'm live on YouTube and we are live on Facebook and we are live on Landlord Coach. So we are up and live and running on three different pages here. I hope you're having a great evening. My name is Mark Dolfini, Landlord Coach, and tonight we're going to be talking about why borrowing as a business can be tricky. Now, there's a lot of people out there who are trying to get into the real estate space and want to be able to borrow as an LLC. Not a bad idea. And I'm not going to say it is a bad idea. In fact, it wasn't long after. Hello, James Martin. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. Out of Texas. I hope it's nice and warm down there. It's certainly, we had a beautiful day up here in Indiana. But one of the things that I hear oftentimes is investors, they want to borrow as an LLC or some sort of S Corp or something like that. They want to set it up that way. And it can be tricky, and that's what the basis of this post is going to be tonight. There's a lot of reasons, good reasons, as to why you want to borrow as an LLC, and there's people who want to invest. They get constrained by borrowing as an individual, and whether you're going into the real estate space or not, there's lots of good reasons to get into investing. Whether it's whether you're doing real estate or razor blades to set it up as an LLC for asset protection and things like that. But just understand that when you set things up as an LLC, things get markedly a little bit more complex, especially if you're going to try to borrow as a business. Now, let's walk down that road a little bit. So I remember back when I first got started, and I was a serious investor, right? I saw on LegalZoom, hey, you can set up an LLC, and it wasn't that complex. Actually, I thought LegalZoom was actually quite easy and quite cheap, quite inexpensive compared to the attorneys that wanted to set up an LLC for every single property that I have. I personally think that's a little excessive, but what I would say to you first and foremost before you set up an LLC is there's two people that you need to talk to that specifically that you may not think of. Well, first of all, you want to talk to an attorney that would probably set that up for you, right? Before you talk to an attorney, though, I would talk to your CPA. And the reason being is because that markedly makes your whole tax world a little bit more complex. Now, my point here is I'm not going to try to talk through all the nuances of LLCs and everything else, because I remember when I set up my LLC for my real estate company, it didn't really change things that much because an LLC is basically a pass-through entity. It doesn't really change much, in terms of my tax consequences, right? It just basically flows from one to me, and it didn't really change much. It did offer some asset protection that if someone was going to sue my business, right, it didn't really impact me. But there's that's not really what I'm talking about. I really want to talk tonight about why borrowing can be tricky in the space as borrowing as an LLC. Specifically because when you borrow as an LLC, and I remember very distinctly, I was wandering into the bank for the first time, wanting to borrow under the auspices of my company, and I got met with a lot of things that I hadn't quite expected. Now, again, for those of you who know my background, I worked in the banking world for a number of years, so I wasn't really that taken aback by it. But keep in mind, just because I was borrowing as a business entity did not let me off the hook for any potential liability because of my company, right? The bank still wanted me to be on the hook for lots of different things that I was borrowing. So if I was going to borrow, for example, if I was buying a 16-unit apartment building, which is one of the few multifamily that I owned at the time. But if I was going to borrow in the world of the commercial lending side and borrowing it under my LLC, they still wanted me on the hook for it, right? Which meant they wanted my personal financial statements, they wanted my personal tax returns, they wanted to see my personal bank accounts. They still wanted all the stuff that related to me, right? So you may not necessarily understand that. Now, unless you're going to self-fund that business and put lots of cash into that business where it's going to be in the name of the business and the business only, they're still going to want you on the hook for that. So that's where things get a little bit tricky. The other thing is they're going to start to ask for things that you may not have ever heard about before, right? For example, let's say that you are preparing financial statements in the name of, 123 ABC LLC, right? That's the name of your company. And so ABC Rentals LLC, now you're going to be creating financial statements, and they're going to be hanging their hat on these financial statements, basically saying, okay, well, we're going to lend based on the strength of those financial statements, but we're going to want to make sure that the information on there is accurate. Okay, that makes sense. Because if you're going to say, well, I made $1 million in this LLC last year, well, okay, fine. Anybody can cook books and make it sound great, but we're really going to want to make sure that an independent person, third party, i.e. a CPA, looked at those. So that's where they may require a certain status of financial statements before you submit them to them, right? Which might mean they might require a CPA to do a compilation, a review, or an audit of those financial statements. Which means that they would provide a compilation, a review, or an audited financial statements. Now, that's where it starts to get tricky, because all of a sudden now you have to pay an independent person or independent third party to get those financial statements, audited or reviewed or compiled and over to the bank. So that's just one layer where it starts to get a little bit complex. The other thing is that when you start to, and you may not necessarily understand accounting rules and what is, what is expected, but when you buy a property, right, you're buying it basically at book value. You're not buying it at, or you're buying at market value, but that market value basically becomes book. So if the value of that property goes up, it doesn't reflect on your balance sheet, or it shouldn't anyway, because that book value versus market value is where it's supposed to stay. Now, again, that is just different to what you might be thinking. Well, that doesn't make sense. Why would you put it on there at, value from 5 years ago, where the value, today is likely higher? I've done $50,000 worth of improvements on the property. Why wouldn't it be worth more? Or the market's gone up. Why wouldn't it be worth more? I'm not saying it's not worth more, but again, don't shoot the messenger. That's just generally how it goes. So when I'm talking about these different things, that's what you should expect from the banker. The banker is going to ask for these certain things. Now, they're also going to require a personal financial statement. A personal financial statement does show market value of things, right? So if you've got that gold bullion sitting in your safe that you can actually show, it's okay to show it on market value, because the personal financial statements generally are done on market value, not on book value. Other things when you're dealing in the commercial realm are just like where you may be getting 30-year amortization on loans that where you borrowed money before. Now, generally, you're going to be looking at much shorter terms, where it might be a 15-year amortization or 20-year amortization if you're lucky, but maybe only a 5-year term. Okay, where at the end of 5 years, they're going to want you to come back to the table and maybe plunk down some equity or refinance it at that point and reset the clock. Because again, if you think about it, the banks make the bulk of their money on the front end of the loan because of the way that amortization works. So these are all things that you have to consider. So yeah, of course they're going to want to reset the clock, because they want to get that bulk of that interest back again on the front end of that loan. So if they're resetting the clock every 5 years, yeah, well, of course they're going to want to do that. And again, it just makes more money for them. So these are the sorts of things why it can be tricky if you don't understand the game that you're climbing into, especially and particularly in the commercial realm. Now, here's the thing. I worked in the commercial lending space for quite a while, for several years, in fact. I worked as an underwriter, and then I worked as a loan review consultant for an accounting firm. And I can tell you that it is a tricky prospect, but it's not overly complex once you understand the rules. It's just kind of like, when you're playing checkers and then you first learn to play chess, even though it's on the same board, you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to understand chess. But after you play it for a while, then you understand not only the rules, but then you understand how to win. Then you start to learn not just the rules on how to move the pieces, but then you learn how to move the pieces so you can actually win. Well, that's kind of how it is in the commercial realm too. Even though it's on the same board, you just need to learn the rules first, and then you learn the strategies and things like that after the fact. One one of the things, and I am going to give a shameless plug here, but one of the things, if you are interested on Black Friday, I am going to be offering a course, not specifically in commercial lending, but in the in that will also teach you part of the lending basics in the commercial space. So if you are interested, that's going to be something I'm going to be offering on Black Friday, but and at a special low price. But I don't usually want to use this platform to plug things like that, but if you are interested in that, don't feel like you're gonna get completely lost. And the commercial lending side is just it's a different world. I think they use a little bit more common sense when they make loans compared to the residential space. I think mostly what they do in the residential lending side is just based on voodoo and hopeful thinking. When they're loaning on gross revenues versus net revenues, that just that doesn't, or gross wages versus net wages. That doesn't even make sense to me, but whatever. I don't make the rules up. But in the commercial realm, I think some of the things they do in fact make more common sense, but you got to understand the rules. And they may ask, like you're going to start to hear funny language like hypothecation agreements and cross collateralization and things like that, cross default provisions. All that stuff, it starts to get really confusing if you don't understand what it is that they're asking for. And you don't really know, hey, am I being taken to the cleaners, or is this just common language? And again, if you don't really know what you're walking into, it can get overly complex. I will, those are the sorts of things that I help to identify. But again, if you have specific questions about that, you're more than welcome to reach out to me at any particular time. I'm happy to help out and address those things on videos like this, or in coaching sessions, or whatever works for you. All right, that's all I have for tonight. No matter what it is that you're doing, if you're going into the commercial lending realm, whether you're borrowing for real estate or you're borrowing for a business idea that you have or whatever it is, just make sure that you understand the rules to play by, and then you at least have a leg up on anybody else that's going in behind you that's trying to borrow for the same thing, but at least you understand what the rules of engagement are. All right. Have a great rest of your evening. Remember, if you don't place a value on your free time, someone else will. And always remember that if you, sorry, did someone message me? You always message me right at the very end. That's all right. If you lost my train of thought there. If you don't place a value in your free time, someone else will, but there is no amount of money that will make time irrelevant. Have a great rest of your evening. Take good care. I'll see you again. Thanks.